In a 1998 behavioral assessment study on group decision-making, participants who spoke with minimal hesitation were consistently rated as more confident and leader-like, even when their decisions were objectively less accurate. What stood out was not performance, but perception. Observers trusted fluency over correctness in repeated trials. Instead, they observed individuals who were consistently deferred to in group settings despite offering minimal emotional warmth, limited empathy signals, and often an unusually instrumental way of speaking about people. What made this pattern scientifically interesting was not that it existed, but that observers repeatedly described these individuals as confident, strong, or natural leaders, even when behavioral data suggested something more calculated underneath. The question is not why some people appear confident. The question is, what if the trait we call confidence is often a misclassification of something else entirely? This analysis operates through the lens of personality structure research commonly associated with the dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathic traits, not as labels, but as measurable behavioral tendencies in social interaction. The focus here is a specific perceptual error, the consistent confusion between emotional fluency and interpersonal confidence. In the work of Daniel Kahneman on cognitive shortcuts, the brain is shown to rely on rapid heuristics when evaluating trustworthiness. One of those heuristics is emotional ease, how smoothly someone expresses themselves under social pressure. But smoothness is not always sincerity, and confidence is not always stability. By the end of this analysis, you will recognize a specific behavioral signal that is frequently mistaken for confidence but often correlates more strongly with strategic self-interest and low emotional reciprocity. Not always, but often enough to matter. Across workplace assessments and group simulations, individuals who speak without hesitation are consistently rated as more competent, even when their actual decisions are no more accurate than average participants. This is known in social psychology as the fluency heuristic. The brain equates ease of expression with truth and capability. But fluency is not neutral. It can be performed. The absence of hesitation is not evidence of certainty. It is evidence of either preparation or disregard for internal conflict signals that typically slow speech in reflective individuals. In real-world settings, this manifests as individuals who respond too quickly to complex questions involving ethics, resources, or human consequences. Detection tool: pay attention not to what is said, but to whether the person appears to skip over internal trade-offs. Confidence rooted in depth includes visible processing. Confidence without processing is often performance. This creates the first misclassification. Calm articulation is mistaken for stable character, but articulation is only the surface layer. In controlled social experiments, researchers observed a distinct pattern among individuals scoring high in dark triad traits. They do not avoid emotion, they regulate its display with precision. They deploy emotional signals strategically rather than spontaneously. This creates an illusion of control, which observers interpret as confidence. Emotional expression, when used instrumentally, becomes a form of social currency rather than a reflection of internal state. You are not seeing less emotion, you are seeing selectively allocated emotion. This is where the misunderstanding deepens. Because genuine confidence usually tolerates emotional leakage, small inconsistencies, hesitation, even uncertainty. But strategic personalities often suppress those signals entirely in high-stakes contexts. Detection tool: look for emotional consistency across contexts. Does the person's emotional tone shift appropriately when the social payoff changes, or does it remain artificially calibrated? If emotion appears too clean, it may not be stability. It may be control. This leads into the next layer: dominance without friction. In group dynamics research, dominance is often associated with assertiveness, interruption patterns, and spatial control of conversation. But a less visible form exists: frictionless dominance. This is where an individual influences outcomes without visible conflict, often by aligning themselves early with group consensus, then subtly steering it. Psychologists studying Machiavellian traits note that this style produces high perceived leadership scores with low emotional resistance from others. True dominance is often remembered. Frictionless dominance is often felt, but not consciously identified. It leaves no obvious trace of coercion, only outcomes that seem to naturally align. Detection tool. Ask yourself who defined the direction of the conversation, not who spoke the most, but who determined the acceptable boundaries of discussion. If someone consistently sets the frame without appearing to, you are not observing passive confidence. You are observing controlled influence. But even this is not the core misidentification. But here is where it becomes more complex. Research on narcissistic traits shows something counterintuitive. Not all high dark triad individuals appear cold or detached. Some appear highly engaged, socially adaptive, even warm in controlled bursts. This breaks the assumption that lack of empathy signals are always visible. Instead, empathy itself can be simulated at a functional level, enough to pass social thresholds without being internally experienced in the same way. What this means is unsettling. The behaviors we associate with emotional intelligence can, in certain cases, be reproduced without the underlying emotional architecture, and observers rarely detect the difference. Because detection was never designed for precision, it was designed for speed. The most consistent misread signal is not confidence itself, but calibration. Individuals with strategic personality traits often adjust their intensity based on audience sensitivity. They become more assertive with uncertainty and more restrained when authority is present. This creates a perfect behavioral illusion, adaptability. But adaptation is not always empathy. Sometimes it is optimization. What appears as reading the room can, in structured observation, reveal itself as continuous behavioral tuning toward maximum social leverage. Detection tool. Observe reversals. Does the person's confidence increase when others hesitate? Does it decrease when challenged by higher status individuals? Stable confidence does not require environmental validation loops. Calibrated confidence does, and this is where misclassification becomes dangerous, not because the behavior is malicious, but because it is efficient. If these patterns hold, then confidence is not a single trait. It is a surface interpretation of multiple underlying systems: emotional regulation, social awareness, and strategic signaling. And those systems do not belong exclusively to good or bad personalities. They are distributed unevenly across people, expressed differently depending on context and motivation, which means the human brain is not evaluating confidence itself, it is evaluating coherence. And when coherence is present, it assumes character, but coherence can be constructed. So the unsettling implication is not that people are deceptive by default. It is that perception was never designed to distinguish between authenticity and optimized behavior. It only recognizes patterns that feel stable. And stability is not the same as truth. Now that the mechanism is visible, the application becomes straightforward. First tool, separate fluency from depth. When someone speaks smoothly under complexity, look for what they are not pausing on. Confidence without internal friction often skips ethical or probabilistic evaluation. Second tool, track emotional allocation. Do not ask whether someone is emotional. Ask whether their emotional expression changes in proportion to genuine informational change or in proportion to social advantage. Third tool, identify calibration shifts. Watch for changes in confidence based on hierarchy, attention, or perceived evaluation. Stable personalities remain structurally consistent across these variables. Strategic personalities do not. And finally, integrate rather than judge. These are not signs of villainy. They are signals of behavioral design under different internal incentives. The distinction matters because misunderstanding confidence does not just distort perception of others. It distorts how influence operates in every social environment you move through. The deeper realization is this: what most people call confidence is often just the absence of visible internal conflict expressed in a socially optimized way. Next, we examine what happens when entire groups begin to reward that signal above all others, and how institutions slowly begin to select for it without realizing it.